لبيك اللهم لبيك لبيك لا شريك لك لبيك.
For centuries, millions have circled it, touched it, and whispered prayers to the heavens, yet almost no one knows what it truly is. Hidden in plain sight at the heart of the Kaaba, the black stone has inspired awe, sparked devotion, and raised questions scholars dared not ask until now. Today, a breakthrough changed everything. Not a rumor, not speculation, hard evidence. What scientists discovered isn't just surprising, it's unsettling. Could this sacred relic carry a history far older and far stranger than we've been told? Before you see it the same way again, you'll want to know what they found, because once the truth is revealed, there's no unseeing it. Material analysis of the black stone. A team of scientists specializing in geochemistry and planetary materials published the most detailed non-invasive analysis to date of the black stone, or Al-Hajar al-Aswad, the enigmatic object embedded in the eastern corner of the Kaaba in Mecca. Using high-resolution spectroscopy, multispectral imaging, and 3D surface scanning technology, researchers were able to capture its surface composition and internal structure without physically disturbing the sacred relic. The scans revealed a dense, fine-grained matrix interspersed with trace mineral deposits, leading to renewed debates about the stone's true geological nature. While earlier theories largely rested on visual inspection and anecdotal data, this new imaging breakthrough offered a far clearer view of the stone's material makeup. One of the major questions surrounding the black stone has been whether it is of meteoritic origin, a claim often repeated in religious and historical narratives. The findings brought both clarity and complexity to this discussion. Preliminary analysis of reflectance spectra indicated low levels of nickel and iron, two key markers commonly found in many iron-based meteorites. However, the density readings and surface porosity did not align neatly with known meteorite samples. Instead, the stone appeared more consistent with a form of volcanic basalt, albeit with some anomalies. The lack of a strong magnetic signature further weakened the meteorite hypothesis, leading some experts to suggest that while it may have been believed to have celestial origins, the physical evidence leans toward terrestrial volcanic rock, possibly altered by centuries of environmental exposure and handling. The study group then compared microspectral and structural characteristics of the black stone with samples from Arabian Peninsula meteorites, local volcanic stones, and agates from ancient trade routes in order to put into proper perspective the compositional characteristics of the black stone. Surprisingly, it turned out to be more similar to certain agate nodules occurring in western Saudi Arabia, rather than extraterrestrial samples. This proposed study seems a bit doubtful, since the absorbed light properties are similar to the scans conducted surface patterning, whereby agates are formed from layers of silica, which are deposited from volcanic cavities. A lot has taken place, but many hindrances still exist. Because it is quite delicate and religious, none of these physical samples can be involved in core drilling, scraping, or chemical tests. From surface-level data, only conclusions can be drawn due to this limitation. With this, a large recurring debate among both the scientific community and the religious community is balanced with sacred heritage against historical turpitude. For now, the black stone is a point of wonderment between faith, science, and mystery. Its secrets really only partially revealed, yet still largely untouchable. Yet, long before technology offered any clues, whispers of the stone's mystery were already echoing through ancient poems, pilgrim trails, and tribal memory. Historical documentation. The historical trail of the black stone begins long before the rise of Islam, embedded within the oral traditions and cultural memory of pre-Islamic Arabia. Though no direct written records from that era survive, references in early Arabic poetry and tribal lore suggest that the stone was a focal point of spiritual attention among various tribes in the region. Mecca itself was a thriving trade and religious hub, and the Kaaba, where the black stone was housed, served as a neutral sanctuary for tribal worship. Some poems allude to sacred objects kissed or touched during rituals, likely pointing to the black stone or similar revered stones. While these mentions are often vague and symbolic, they reinforce the idea that stone worship or veneration was part of pre-Islamic religious life, particularly as part of larger polytheistic practices centered around natural objects believed to hold divine power. With the advent of Islam in the 7th century, the black stone's role was retained but redefined within a monotheistic framework. Islamic-era sources such as Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim provide some of the earliest explicit documentation of the stone's religious function. These texts record that the Prophet Muhammad kissed the black stone during the Hajj pilgrimage, an action that Muslims later adopted as part of the sacred rites. Notably, the stone is described in Hadith as having once been white but turning black due to the sins of mankind, and on the Day of Judgment, it is said to testify in favor of those who touched it sincerely. In addition to Islamic sources, accounts provided by non-Muslim travelers, historians, and geographers contain contextual information of a valuable nature. Byzantine chroniclers, Persian ambassadors, and even early European travelers, such as Ibn Rusta and, a bit later, William of Rubruck, expounded on aspects of Arabian religious life, especially the rituals at the Kaaba. These accounts were often based on hearsay and influenced by cultural bias, yet they repeatedly confirmed the importance of the black stone in the Meccan rites. Some reports likened the veneration of the stone to idolatry, emphasizing the dilemma that outside observers faced in reconciling Islamic rejection of idolatry with the honor of a tactile object. And while these external records were also fragmentary, they give meaning to understanding the stone's everlasting importance and its relevance across cultural divides. Over the years, the story of the black stone has evolved through theology, historical events, and religious interpretation. Early Islamic scholars tended to find the veneration of the stone physically primitive by the standards of the strict monotheism of Islam. Gradually, this role has been reinterpreted. The stone became less viewed as an object of worship, although it was understood as a symbol of obedience and continuity with the actions of the Prophet. In response to dissent, apologetic literature prioritizes the interpretation of the black stone as an object symbolizing obedience to God and continuity with the Prophet's actions over the literal interpretation, which is questioned by some reformist voices of today. The Cabba Reconstructions. The Kaaba, long before becoming the symbolic heart of Islam, was already a revered structure in pre-Islamic Arabia. Situated in Mecca, it served as a central shrine for various Arabian tribes who journeyed from across the region to perform religious rites. The Quraysh tribe, custodians of the Kaaba during Muhammad's early life, benefited from its status as both a spiritual and commercial center. Ancient Arab traditions indicate that the Kaaba housed numerous idols, historically cited as 360, one for each day of the lunar year, representing the many deities worshipped by different tribes. Despite this polytheistic setting, the Kaaba was respected as a sacred zone where violence was forbidden, offering a rare place of peace and negotiation among often warring clans. Its cultural gravity was immense, blending tribal spirituality with social cohesion. Architecturally, the Kaaba has undergone several reconstructions, reflecting not only damage from floods and fires, but also changes in religious and political authority. Before Islam, the Quraysh rebuilt the Kaaba using local materials, adding a roof and raising its walls. One notable incident occurred during this reconstruction when a dispute arose about who would place the revered black stone back into position. According to Islamic tradition, the young Muhammad resolved the conflict by suggesting that the stone be placed on a cloth and lifted jointly by all tribal leaders, with Muhammad himself positioning it into the wall, an act that elevated his standing among the tribes and foreshadowed his future leadership. After the advent of Islam, further renovations took place under various caliphs and rulers, some of whom made controversial structural changes, such as altering the Kaaba's door height or adjusting its dimensions to match what they believed was the original Abrahamic design. The significant change of the Kaaba into a religious identity occurred during Muhammad's leadership after his re-entry into Mecca in the year 630 CE. Entering the town, Muhammad ordered the idols to be removed from the Kaaba, declaring it a monotheistic shrine for the worship of Allah alone. This singular and heroic act becomes the defining moment in Islamic history, when a polytheistic temple was replaced with the spiritual heart of Islam. From then on, this Kaaba became the Qibla, the direction Muslims turn to during their 5 daily prayers, bringing together a previously fractured spiritual landscape in the worship of one God. This new direction not only re-territorialized the Kaaba as a holy site, but also as a landmark signifying theological lucidity and the unity of the Islamic worldview. With that new directive, then, this redirection actually reinforced the Kaaba as a religious landmark, signifying theological clarity and religious unity, even in the Islamic view. In all these centuries, the Kaaba has remained practically unchanged in function, even while the environment surrounding it, the Masjid al-Haram, expanded tremendously to accommodate millions of pilgrims each year. Its continued use in rites such as Hajj and Umrah, and especially Tawaf, the circumambulation, unites modern Islamic observance with both ancient tribal customs and the prophetic reforms initiated by Muhammad. However, its layered history of rebuilding, reinterpretation, and reappropriation remains marked on its very stones. The Kaaba is not merely a monument, but a living symbol of religious transformation, cultural continuity, and the dynamic nature of sacred space. Pagan practices. In pre-Islamic Arabia, the veneration of stones held deep spiritual significance, forming a key aspect of the region's religious landscape. Sacred stones, known as beitls, were believed to house divine presence or serve as physical manifestations of deities. These stones, often unshaped and naturally occurring, were placed in shrines, tents, or open-air sanctuaries, and revered as intermediaries between the human and the divine. Some tribes believed these stones could offer protection, respond to prayers, or serve as oracles. Pilgrims would touch, anoint, or even kiss them, seeking blessings or guidance. The black stone in Mecca likely belonged to this class of revered objects, its sanctity rooted not in its physical properties alone, but in its perceived spiritual potency. This form of animistic veneration was widespread across Arabia and echoed in other Semitic traditions throughout the ancient Near East. Similar rituals involving sacred objects were practiced across the broader region, particularly in the Mesopotamian, Nabatean, and Canaanite religious systems. Circumambulation, walking in a circle around a sacred object or structure, was not unique to the Islamic Hajj. In various Near Eastern pagan traditions, worshippers would circle altars, stones, or temples as a form of ritual purification or submission. Touching or kissing these objects served as a tactile act of devotion, believed to connect the individual with divine power. The Kaaba, in its pre-Islamic function, was a prime site for such practices. Pilgrims from multiple tribes would gather to perform rites that included walking around the cube-shaped structure and venerating the black stone. These rituals, while reinterpreted in Islamic theology, trace their procedural roots to long-standing regional customs. The Islamic monotheism did not erase the halls of pagan polytheism, but only changed the spaces. Now, an Islamic theology interprets an existing rite in an administrative straitjacket, linking its act to divine command and not to the objects in themselves. For instance, the black stone was no longer an object of worship. Rather, it would be beyond imitation in the act of the Prophet Muhammad. The Tawaf has kept the ritual in its initial form, but rather defined it as obedience toward Allah than as tribute to the tribal gods. Such reassigning of meaning would thus also allow Islam to assimilate old familiar practices, bringing redirection in their spirituality. This has helped forge a new religion into one ambiguous mass, under an unfamiliar identity without requiring the total discarding of inherited customs. Modern historians are likely to describe such a phenomenon as religious syncretism, that is, blending or adaptation of older traditions into some newer religious framework. While Indian sources suggest much about the purity and uniqueness of worship forms for the religion, that legacy is often considered early by many historians and rather anthropologically understood as having been from the paradigm in which the religion developed. Such interpretations do not at all undermine Islamic attribution, but actually show how religions change by recasting what already exists into something that could present it within a different framework. Theological claims in Islam. Islamic religious texts offer several key references that shape the theological understanding of the Black Stone, especially through hadith literature. According to multiple authenticated hadiths, the Prophet Muhammad kissed the Black Stone during the Hajj pilgrimage, an act that was subsequently adopted by Muslims as a standard practice during the ritual of Tawaf. One hadith from Sahih al-Bukhari recounts how Umar ibn al-Khattab, the second caliph, acknowledged the stone's lack of intrinsic power, but stated he kissed it only because the Prophet had done so. Another narration in Jami at-Tirmidhi suggests that on the Day of Judgment, the Black Stone will be given eyes and a tongue, enabling it to testify in favor of those who touched it sincerely. The Quran, however, does not specifically mention the Black Stone. Instead, it emphasizes strict monotheism and warns against assigning divine attributes to created things. Passages such as Surah Al-Baqarah 2:165 and Surah Al-A'raf 7:191 caution against invoking entities that cannot see, hear, or benefit the worshipper. These verses reflect the broader Islamic principle of Tawhid, the oneness and incomparability of God, which underpins all legitimate acts of worship. From a Quranic standpoint, reverence for physical objects is only acceptable if they serve as reminders of divine commandments and do not become intermediaries themselves. The absence of any direct reference to the Black Stone in the Quran leads some scholars to argue that its veneration is a matter of tradition, not revelation, and therefore must be understood within strict theological boundaries. More than anything else, the controversial hadith states that the Black Stone will speak on the Day of Judgment. The scholars are divided on whether it should be taken literally or metaphorically. Literalists argue that since the hadith is sahih, it has to be taken at face value, which means that somehow the stone has to be made able to speak by the divine miracle according to God's plan. For others, such as al-Muhasibi, the hadith is understood figuratively, whereby testimony rather refers to the knowledge that God has of sincere worship, and not a voice from the stone. This split interpretation signifies much more: the continuing strife in Islamic scholarship over the literalist or contextual or rationalist approach, especially sensitive subject with regard to those elements which appear to impinge on the strict Islamic prohibition against idolatry. The acts of the Prophet Muhammad are the chief corroboration for the Black Stone's role as an Islamic element of ritual. His kiss of the stone during pilgrimage becomes the precedent upon which Muslim custom is based, but Islamic doctrine holds that it is the Prophet's obedience that gives merit to such an act, not the stone. This distinction is vital in Islamic doctrine. It may be defined as an act of devotion, but must never be to the object itself. Thus, the Black Stone does not serve as an object of veneration, but rather as a symbolic touchstone of prophetic continuity, in fact recontextualized into stringent monotheism. While theology defines its meaning, the human mind adds another layer, one driven not by doctrine, but by instinct. Cultural power of religious objects. The psychological and cultural power of religious objects, such as the Black Stone, is deeply rooted in the human tendency to anthropomorphize and spiritualize the material world. Cognitive science suggests that humans are predisposed to attribute agency and intention to inanimate objects. a trait believed to have evolved as a survival mechanism. This tendency, known as hyperactive agency detection, allows people to infer meaning or purpose even in lifeless forms. When applied to religious settings, this results in sacred artifacts being seen not just as symbols, but as carriers of divine presence or moral authority. The black stone's perceived ability to speak on Judgment Day, as described in Islamic tradition, reflects this psychological impulse. By imagining the stone as an entity capable of bearing witness, believers forge a personal connection to it, reinforcing the sense that their religious actions are being recorded and acknowledged by something beyond themselves. Pilgrimage rituals like those performed during Hajj amplify this phenomenon through collective behavior and emotional reinforcement. When millions of Muslims gather to circle the Kaaba and attempt to touch or kiss the black stone, the shared physical experience intensifies individual belief. Social psychologists have shown that group rituals trigger emotional synchrony, which enhances feelings of spiritual connection and communal identity. The presence of others performing the same act creates a feedback loop. Each person's devotion reinforces that of their neighbors. In this setting, the black stone becomes more than just a rock embedded in a wall. It becomes a focal point for unity, purpose, and transcendence. The crowd's physical orientation toward the same object adds layers of meaning and emotional gravity, making the ritual experience deeply memorable and psychologically potent. This is not a way restricted to Islam for the reverence of sacred objects. Cross-cultural studies show that physical artifacts serve as icons of faith and emotional imprinting in many religious traditions. Be it the relics in Catholic Christianity, statues in Hinduism, or totems in indigenous spirituality, the tangible symbols serve more so to externalize and reinforce the believer's internal conviction. It is often as if these objects provide a bridge between the visible and invisible, mundane and divine. The emotional associations formed around them are usually formed during childhood and strengthened through acts of repetition, storytelling, and collective practice. Religion scholars maintain that these symbols form a crucial foundation of group identity that enables followers to feel anchored to a common tradition and worldview. Touch, repetition, and nearness are components crucial to the formation of sacred experience. Touching a religious object signifies the transfer or reception, usually, of a blessing. Repeating actions, such as circling the Kaaba, affirming deep commitment and devotion, would serve this purpose as well. Spiritual significance is lent to being physically near a sacred object. These acts together heighten emotional content, then appropriate religious significance to the act being performed. Touching or kissing the black stone during Hajj symbolically becomes an intimate transaction of spiritual empowerment for an individual and an affirmation of one's relationship with the divine. Interpretations by early Islamic figures. The views of early Islamic figures regarding the black stone provide key insights into how the object was understood and rationalized within the framework of Tawhid, the Islamic doctrine of monotheism. One of the most cited statements comes from Umar ibn al-Khattab, the second caliph of Islam, who famously said while kissing the black stone, "By Allah, I know that you are only a stone, and can neither harm nor benefit anyone. Had I not seen the Prophet kiss you, I would not have kissed you." This statement reflects a conscious effort to distance the act from any suggestion of idolatry. It acknowledges the danger of attributing divine power to a physical object, while affirming that the action is justified solely by prophetic precedent. Umar's words were not an expression of doubt in the ritual, but a safeguard against theological misunderstanding, setting an important tone for early Muslim attitudes toward sacred symbols. As Islam expanded rapidly in its early centuries, Muslim scholars and leaders faced the challenge of preserving rituals like the kissing of the black stone without contradicting the strict monotheistic principles that distinguished Islam from the surrounding polytheistic cultures. Early Islamic theologians argued that the reverence shown to the stone was not directed at the object itself, but at the prophetic example it represented. The stone, in this view, served as a ritual tool rather than a divine entity. By framing the practice within the category of sunnah, actions performed by the prophet, and thus worthy of emulation, they were able to retain the ritual without compromising the doctrine of God's uniqueness. This rationalization helped unify a growing Muslim population that was transitioning from deeply ingrained tribal customs to a stricter, codified religious identity. Internal stresses have persisted, however, in how they interpret the physical engagement with the black stone. Some of the early thinkers expressed much concern about how, to an outsider or even a recent convert, veneration of the stone would seem no different than idol worship. In fact, this concern was not totally ill-founded, given the region's utilization of stone worship and the emotionalism many of the devout still showed toward real symbols of religion. Therefore, religious leaders and scholars emphasized niyyah or intention in such ritual acts, arguing that it was the inner devotion to God and not the object itself that made an act legitimate. This is a very critical point in managing to keep intact the theological integrity of Islam while being able to allow some continuity with traditional rites. Slowly, the Islamic jurisprudence began to formalize the laws and interpretations around physical participation with the black stone. Legal schools such as Hanafi and Maliki formulated their opinions regarding whether touching or kissing the stone was compulsory or mustahab. There were debates on who was exempted from reaching the stone because of the large crowd. Therefore, pointing towards the stone was authorized as a symbolic gesture. All these changing interpretations helped keep the ritual intact in the increasingly heterogeneous and large Muslim context. Sacred relics and iconography. Throughout religious history, sacred relics and icons have played a powerful role in shaping devotional practice across a wide range of faiths. In Christianity, the cross stands as the central symbol of faith, representing the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus Christ. In many Christian traditions, particularly Roman Catholicism and Eastern Orthodoxy, relics, such as bones of saints, fragments of the true cross, or items associated with Jesus, are venerated as conduits of divine grace. These objects are often displayed in reliquaries, kissed or touched during acts of prayer, believed to provide spiritual intercession. In Judaism, though the religion generally avoids physical representation of the divine, historical artifacts such as the Ark of the in Hinduism and Buddhism, the veneration of physical icons is not only accepted but central to daily worship. In Hindu temples, murti, sacred statues of deities, are bathed, dressed, and offered food, reflecting an intimate devotional relationship between worshipper and deity. These idols are not believed to be mere representations but are thought to house the essence of the divine during rituals. Similarly, in many Buddhist traditions, statues of the Buddha, or bodhisattvas, serve as focal points for meditation and reverence. Pilgrims travel great distances to touch or circumambulate these sacred images, believing such contact fosters spiritual merit. Different theological traditions justify or condemn the use of relics or sacred objects in their unique terms. For example, relics are not worshipped in Catholicism, but honored with regard to their link with holy persons or divine events. This belief postulates that through such physical items, miracles may be worked by God, but they do not have any divine qualities as such within themselves. Within Protestant Christianity, especially after the Reformation, there was hardly any acceptance of relics, regarding them as distractions from a person's upfront faith in God. This has grave prohibitions against graven images, rooted in the commandments of the Torah despite the historical reverence Judaism has towards sacred objects. Islam takes a distinct position as dovetailed into and away from these. It does not support the images, statues, or the visible features of God, yet keeps some relic-based practices, like veneration of the black stone. Such acts are framed strictly within prophetic reference and purpose by Islam, however, unlike Hinduism or Catholicism, which states that the object has no power without God. Thus, Islam's theological logic strives to create a black-and-white divide between reverence and worship. In practice, however, such rituals are exercised around the black stone, just like those of other religions, which indicate that human beings, no matter what religion, are naturally predisposed to tangible anchors for spiritual expression. Modern Islamic scholarly perspectives. Modern Islamic scholarly discourse on the black stone reveals a nuanced and, at times, polarized debate between reformist and traditionalist perspectives. Traditionalist scholars uphold the legitimacy of the black stone's veneration, emphasizing that it is not worshipped, but honored due to the Prophet Muhammad's actions. They argue that since the Prophet kissed the stone and instructed others to follow his example during the pilgrimage, its role is part of the Sunnah and thus divinely sanctioned. In contrast, reformist voices within the Muslim world question whether the practice aligns with the principle of Tawhid, the oneness of God, and caution against the emotional or theological elevation of any physical object. Recent fatwas and academic papers have revisited the significance of the black stone in light of these concerns. Some Islamic jurists and modern thinkers have issued rulings reaffirming that the stone should be respected but not imbued with spiritual power. Contextual understanding has been further argued by some that though the stone is a major unifier in the early Islamic period, the same needs questioning with respect to its current relevance. Many present-day publications from Islamic universities and research institutions explore such issues, attempting to mediate between fidelity to the traditions and staying true to monotheism. Increasingly available education, combined with global discourse through the internet and academic exchanges, has also changed the way Muslims now understand the ritual associated with the black stone. Young and educated Muslims are discussing with ever greater frequency the parameters of liturgy, researching its symbolism, examining historical contexts, and questioning theological integrity. Long-held beliefs have been revisited by believers due to exposure to the critical thinking processes learned through study in such fields as comparative religion and historical criticism. As debates over meaning unfold in seminaries and journals, another controversy is quietly emerging, not theological, but technological. Ethical considerations for further study. Studying the black stone presents unique challenges due to its religious and cultural sanctity. Physical contact beyond what is permitted during pilgrimage is strictly prohibited, making scientific examination extremely limited. Researchers cannot extract samples, perform chemical tests, or use tools that could risk damaging or altering the stone. The Kaaba, as Islam's holiest site, is protected under both religious law and national authority, meaning any attempt to conduct invasive research would be seen not only as disrespectful, but potentially blasphemous. In recent years, non-invasive technologies like multispectral imaging, 3D surface mapping, and AI-based pattern recognition have opened new avenues for study. These tools allow for external analysis without physical interference, offering insights into the stone's surface composition and structure. Still, there's debate even over these methods. Some scholars argue that applying such technologies, even from a respectful distance, risks undermining the sacredness of the object by subjecting it to purely secular scrutiny. Others support these methods, arguing that they could add understanding to the picture without crossing religious jurisdiction, provided there is full transparency and cooperative engagement with the Islamic authorities. The ethical issues of studying religious artifacts such as the black stone could get very complicated. For some secular researchers, the object might merely be a historical specimen or geologically fascinating, whereas believers regard it as something of spiritual significance. This tension raises questions about who should have the right to study sacred objects and under which conditions. Studies done without an invitation or with insufficient respect, risk alienating local communities, inciting possible backlash if the outcomes find interpretations that question established traditions. Ethical research, in this case, requires cultural sensitivity, interfaith dialogue, and often the presence of religious scholars who help set appropriate boundaries. If this opened your eyes or challenged what you thought you knew, don't forget to like, comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more deep dives into history, faith, and hidden truths. Got questions? Drop them below. We read every one. And don't miss the next video popping up on your screen right now. Trust me, you'll want to see it.